The streets of Los Angeles buzzed with their usual energy, honking cars, distant chatter, and the occasional melody of a street musician playing his heart out for a few spare dollars. The golden sun bathed the city in warmth, and among the sea of people enjoying the afternoon, Keanu Reeves walked unnoticed. He relished these rare moments of anonymity when he could simply blend in without cameras flashing or fans crowding around him. No scripts, no interviews, no pressure. Just the simple pleasure of walking through the city, soaking in the world as a regular guy. But just as he turned a corner, something made him stop. A voice, loud, angry, filled with venom, cut through the air. It came from a narrow side street, just off the main road. Keanu's brows furrowed as he instinctively turned toward the noise. There, near a sleek black sports car, stood a boy no older than 10, his small hands gripping the handlebars of a bicycle. His clothes were slightly worn, his sneakers scuffed, and his eyes, wide and filled with fear. Towering over him was a well-dressed man in an expensive suit, his face contorted in rage. His body language radiated anger and arrogance, and even from a distance, Keanu could see that the boy was trembling. "You little brat," the man's voice boomed, making a few passers-by glance over. "Do you have any idea how much this car is worth?" The boy stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." The man snorted with disgust. "Oh, of course you didn't," he spat. "You people never do. Always careless, always disrespectful." Keanu felt his stomach tighten. The words. The way the man looked at the boy. It wasn't just anger. It was something uglier, something Keanu couldn't ignore. His quiet afternoon had just turned into something else entirely. And he wasn't going to walk away. Keanu took a slow step forward, blending into the growing group of onlookers. Though the busy street was just a few steps away, the tension in the alley made it feel like a different world entirely. The man in the expensive suit continued his tirade, his voice rising with every word. "Do you even understand what you've done?" he snapped. "This isn't some piece of junk like your little bike. This is a car that costs more than you'll ever see in your lifetime." The boy flinched at the words, gripping his handlebars as if they were the only thing keeping him standing. His face wasn't just scared, it was ashamed. His lips trembled as he looked up at the towering man, trying to speak. I didn't mean to touch it," he said. "I was just trying to—" The man cut him off with a sharp laugh, dripping with cruelty. "Yeah, right. First, you touched the car. Next thing I know, you're trying to steal something. I know exactly how this goes." Keanu's breath hitched. It wasn't just rage in the man's voice. It was prejudice. It was hatred disguised as entitlement. The boy shrank back, his small frame looking even smaller compared to the towering businessman. His fingers clenched the handlebars so tightly that his knuckles turned white. But the man wasn't finished. He took a deliberate step forward, invading the boy's space. "You people always think you can get away with things like this," he sneered. "But not this time. This time, you're going to learn your place." Keanu felt something snap inside him. He had seen enough. He didn't need to hear another word. With quiet determination, he stepped forward, placing himself between the boy and the man. The businessman stopped mid-rant, blinking in surprise. Keanu's voice, steady and calm, cut through the thick air. "I think you've said enough." The alley fell completely silent, all eyes turned to him. And suddenly, the entire situation had changed. The businessman blinked, momentarily caught off guard. His fury had been so focused on the boy that he hadn't noticed Keanu approach. Now, standing face to face with him, he hesitated. Keanu, dressed casually in jeans and a worn leather jacket, didn't look intimidating. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't throwing accusations. But there was something about him, a quiet authority that couldn't be ignored. The boy, still gripping his bicycle, looked up in shock. Someone, a stranger no less, had stepped in to defend him. No one ever did that. The businessman let out a scoff, his confidence returning. He squared his shoulders, looking Keanu up and down with thinly veiled contempt. "And who the hell are you?" he demanded. "This isn't your business." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I was walking by," he said simply. "I heard your voice all the way from the main road." He paused, his voice turning slightly sharper. "And I didn't like what I heard." The businessman's nostrils flared. "I don't care what you like," he snapped. This kid, he gestured aggressively toward the boy, scratched my car. Do you have any idea what kind of damage that could cause? Keanu glanced at the sleek black vehicle, then back at the boy, who was still frozen in place. I didn't hear him admit to that, Keanu said calmly. I heard him apologize. That's a big difference. The businessman let out a dry laugh. Oh, come on. You know how kids like him are. First, it's an accident. Then it's a missing wallet or... Keanu's eyes darkened. That was it. That was the moment everything changed. The businessman had revealed what this was really about. It was never about the car. It was about who the boy was. Keanu took a slow step forward, his voice calm but dangerously steady. I don't think you want to finish that sentence. The businessman stiffened. His bravado wavered for just a second. Keanu wasn't yelling, wasn't making a scene. But the weight of his words, the warning in them, was deafening. The growing crowd of onlookers watched intently. The balance of power in this situation had shifted. And the businessman, he knew it. The businessman's confidence wavered, his eyes darting between Keanu and the growing number of onlookers. He had started this confrontation feeling in control, feeling superior, but now the power had shifted. Keanu wasn't yelling, he wasn't threatening, but there was something in his calm, unwavering stare that made the businessman's skin crawl. The boy, still clutching his bicycle, watched in stunned silence. He had spent his life being dismissed, ignored, and talked down to. But now, someone was standing up for him. The businessman let out a nervous chuckle, trying to regain his footing. Look, I don't want any trouble, he said, raising his hands slightly. I just want him to take responsibility for what he did. Keanu folded his arms across his chest. And how exactly do you expect him to do that? The businessman hesitated. Well, I mean, he should... Keanu shook his head. Number. You don't actually care about responsibility, he said, his voice low and deliberate. You care about making him feel small. The businessman's face flushed. That's not true, he snapped. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? A murmur rippled through the small crowd. People were watching. The businessman could feel their judgment now, their silent disapproval pressing down on him. He had been so sure of himself moments ago, but now he was squirming under the weight of his own words. Keanu turned to the boy, his expression softening. Are you okay? The boy nodded hesitantly. I didn't mean to touch his car, he stammered. I was just trying to move out of the way when... Keanu nodded. I believe you. The businessman scoffed. Oh, great. So now we're just taking his word for it? Keanu's gaze snapped back to him. I'd take his word over yours any day. The businessman opened his mouth to argue, but this time, nothing came out. Because deep down, he knew. He had already lost. The businessman's jaw clenched, his face turning a shade of red that made it clear. He was losing control. What had started as his confrontation had now become his embarrassment. The onlookers weren't just observing anymore. They were judging. Keanu, however, remained completely composed. He had seen men like this before, people who thrived on belittling others, who used their status to make themselves feel powerful. But today, it wasn't working. The businessman let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head. So that's it? You step in. Keanu's expression didn't change. I don't have to act like anything, he said simply. You did that all on your own. A few people in the crowd chuckled quietly. Someone nearby muttered, He's got a point. The businessman heard it. His nostrils flared as he ran a frustrated hand through his neatly combed hair. Look, he said, his voice now more controlled, as if trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. I didn't mean anything by what I said. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Didn't you? A tense silence stretched between them. The businessman shifted uncomfortably. I just don't want kids thinking they can go around touching things that don't belong to them. Keanu nodded slowly, as if considering his words. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. And I don't want people thinking they can go around treating others like they don't belong. The businessman's face drained of color. That was it. The final, undeniable truth laid out in front of everyone. He had lost. Not just the argument, but the respect of everyone watching. Keanu, sensing the weight of the moment, turned to the boy and crouched slightly so they were at eye level. Hey, kid, he said gently. "You don't owe this man an apology. You don't owe him anything." The boy's eyes widened. No one had ever told him that before. For the first time since the confrontation began, he stood a little taller. The businessman, now humiliated beyond repair, exhaled sharply. Without another word, he turned, storming toward his expensive car. As he yanked open the door, someone in the crowd called out, "Hey, careful with that door. You might scratch your own car." A ripple of laughter followed, and just like that, he was gone. As the businessman's car roared away, the tension in the alley finally lifted. The onlookers, who had remained frozen in silent anticipation, now exchanged quiet murmurs. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others chuckled at the irony of how the arrogant man had humiliated himself. Keanu, however, didn't watch him leave. His focus remained on the boy. "Are you okay?" he asked again, his voice steady but warm. The boy nodded hesitantly, his grip on the handlebars finally loosening. But there was still uncertainty in his eyes. He had spent so much time being treated as less than, he didn't quite know what to do with the fact that someone, especially someone like Keanu Reeves, had just defended him. Keanu must have sensed it because he offered a small smile. "You handled that well," he said. "Not everyone would have stood their ground like you did." The boy looked up at him, confusion flickering across his face. I didn't do anything," he mumbled. Keanu shrugged. "You didn't run. You didn't yell. You stayed and told the truth." He nodded toward the spot where the businessman had stood. "And you didn't let him break you?" For the first time since the confrontation began, the boy smiled, just a little. A woman from the crowd, likely one of the bystanders who had witnessed the whole thing, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's right," she said kindly. "You've got a lot more strength than you think." The boy's smile grew just a fraction more. Another voice chimed in. "Honestly, I've never seen someone shut a guy down like that." A man in a baseball cap shook his head, grinning. "Keanu, man, that was legendary." Keanu chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know about that," he said. "I just don't like seeing people treated unfairly." Someone else nodded. "We could all learn from that." More people murmured in agreement. The energy in the crowd had shifted completely. What had started as a moment of humiliation and anger had transformed into a lesson in respect and standing up for what's right. Keanu turned back to the boy. "Where were you heading before all this?" The boy hesitated. "Just riding around," he said quietly. "I wasn't really going anywhere." Keanu nodded. "Well, don't let this stop you." He gestured to the open road ahead. "Go enjoy your ride." The boy looked up at him, something new in his expression. Confidence. And then, without another word, he nodded, pushed off with his foot, and rode away. As Keanu watched him go, he knew one thing for certain. This was a moment the boy would never forget. As the boy rode off, the hum of his bicycle wheels fading into the distance, the crowd around Keanu slowly began to disperse. Some people left, shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed, while others exchanged quiet words about how quickly the situation had changed. Keanu, however, remained standing there for a moment longer, his gaze lingering on the road ahead. He knew this wasn't just about one boy, one man, or one argument. It was about something bigger. How many times had this boy, or someone just like him, been talked down to, ignored, or dismissed? How many times had people looked at someone and decided their worth before even knowing them? Keanu took a deep breath, pushing his hands into his jacket pockets. He couldn't change the whole world, but he had changed something today, and sometimes that was enough. As he turned to leave, he noticed one of the bystanders, a young woman with a kind face, hesitating before stepping toward him. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves," she said softly. Keanu turned, offering her a small smile. "Just Keanu," he said. She nodded, then glanced at the now empty street where the boy had been standing just moments ago. "I just wanted to say, that was incredible," she admitted. "I wish more people would step in like that." Keanu gave a thoughtful nod. "Anyone could have," he said. "Most people just don't." The woman frowned slightly. "Why do you think that is?" Keanu let out a quiet chuckle, as if he had asked himself that same question 1,000 times. "Fear, maybe," he said, "or habit. People assume someone else will do something, but the truth is, It only takes one person to change the whole moment. The woman nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. Then, after a brief pause, she smiled. Well, I just wanted to thank you. That kid, he's going to remember this for the rest of his life. Keanu smiled back. I hope so. With that, she walked away, leaving Keanu standing alone once more. He glanced up at the sky, the late afternoon sun beginning to dip lower, casting warm golden light across the buildings. Today had been unexpected, but he wouldn't have changed a thing. Because if there was one thing Keanu Reeves believed in, it was this. Doing the right thing doesn't need an audience. It just needs someone willing to act. And today, that someone had been him. Keanu took one last glance at the now empty street before he started walking away. The city had returned to its usual rhythm, cars passing, people moving, life continuing as if nothing had happened. But for Keanu, this moment wouldn't be forgotten. And he knew. It wouldn't be forgotten by that boy either. As he made his way down the sidewalk, his steps slow and thoughtful, Keanu thought about the times in his own life when someone had stepped up for him. Moments that had shaped him, taught him what mattered, and showed him the kind of person he wanted to be. It wasn't about being a hero. It wasn't about making a statement. It was simply about doing what was right. A group of people still lingering nearby exchanged glances as they watched Keanu pass. Some whispered quietly, others simply smiled, as if recognizing that they had just witnessed something rare. One man, who had been standing near the entrance of a small coffee shop during the entire scene, took a sip of his drink before shaking his head with an amused grin. Only Keanu Reeves would stop mid-walk to put some arrogant guy in his place, he muttered to himself. A woman sitting on a bench nearby heard him and laughed. And in the calmest way possible, too, she added. Keanu wasn't paying attention to any of it. He wasn't thinking about the onlookers or the murmurs of approval. All he cared about was that one kid, riding off with a new understanding, that he mattered, that someone had seen him, that someone had stood up for him, and hopefully, one day, that boy would do the same for someone else. Because that's how change happens. Not through grand gestures, not through speeches or fame, but through small moments, moments where someone chooses to act instead of walking away. Keanu pulled his jacket a little tighter around himself as a cool breeze rolled in. With one last glance at the city around him, he let out a quiet breath and disappeared into the streets. No cameras, no spotlight, just a man who had done the right thing and moved on. This story reminds us that sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to change everything. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where someone's kindness or courage turned a situation around? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring content.